Thank you very much, Paul. All right, I'll just start sharing my screen. Penny, can you allow me to share my screen?
Done.
Brilliant. All right. Welcome everybody, and welcome to this workshop. As Paul noted, this is part of the CALTHE conference, and to start off, as we would with any formal introduction and workshop, we acknowledge the people, the traditional owners of the country throughout Australia and New Zealand, being a cross-national grouping that we are, and we recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to the elders, past, present and emerging. We also pay our respect to any Aboriginal, Torres Strait or Māori attendees with us today. So welcome. As I noted in the chat space, and as many of you have noted, today I am joining from the Kurunga Nation or Kurunga country in Adelaide. So I'm doing a remote access to a remote workshop. And today our workshop is going to be on academic staffing. And particularly looking at auditing, mapping and developing a staff knowledge and skills and qualifications. We'll see that this is a bit of a transition from what we've been looking at within the threshold learning standards or threshold learning outcomes, or the standards. And we're moving in this space here largely to address a commonly noted item that people either want support with or has been noted as something of concern within accreditation, re-accreditation processes. So what we're going to go through today is looking at staffing profiles, and particularly looking at what are the different things that have been looked at within accreditation processes and how we can develop these. As we progress through today, we'll have some activities and workshops. We are prepared for the 70 that will join us shortly, but we will have an excellent experience with those excellent participants that we have with us already. And so what are we going to look at specifically today? Well, we're going to address this in 4 parts. We'll first start with the staffing foundation. We'll then look at capability or capably equipped staff, and we'll also tie this into AACSB. I know that some of the institutions that you're representing are either AACSB members or are looking to become accredited with AACSB. So I will show you again the nesting opportunity that we've got here, similar to what we've addressed within previous workshops. The third point we'll cover off, and we'll cover this relatively briefly, is student accessibility. And then fourth, looking at the gaps in the staffing profile, and then particularly looking at strategies to eliminate future gaps within that profile. When we get to this fourth part of the workshop today, we also want to make a transition. Some of you have responded to a survey looking at the future of the College of Peers, and we're going to have a look at what we'd like to focus on at that stage. Again, looking to see this as very open discussion using your input to guide that process. As we are going through, please do interrupt if you do have any questions. More than happy for you to do so. And please do that by putting your hand up in the electronic way. I can't see the screens. I'm only working off one screen today. So if you can put your hand up, that will put you up to the top of my list. Otherwise, please just interrupt verbally as well. So first up, staffing foundation. So what are we going to be looking at here within the staffing foundation? Well, primarily we're going to be building this workshop and the foundation for what we're going to be talking about on the Australian Higher Education Standards, what TECSA uses for accreditation, re-accreditation processes. And this is in standard 3 of the standards. As we'll also touch on this, or as we've touched on in the past, what we see is that these standards for higher education are actually similar across the world. The New Zealand standards are very similar to what we see in Australia, but this is also similar in other countries as well. And as I noted before, we'll touch on where these connections exist within AACSB as well, to give an indication of the international standards or internationalization of these standards as well. So as the starting point is, what is the foundation that institutions are needing to demonstrate for their staff or faculty? And here, when we're talking about staffing, I'm going to focus on academic staff, or what they term in the US and AACSB as faculty. So within staffing foundations, we come across these three different aspects. First is sufficiency, second is oversight and capacity, and third is the equipped. So what is sufficiency? So sufficiency means that within the institution's profile, within the course profile, is that they've got sufficient numbers of staff to meet the educational, academic support, and administrative needs of the student cohorts undertaking the course. Basically, they've got enough staff employed to deliver the program, to administer the program, and to support the students in that course to achieve the outcomes that they've outlined. Within oversight and capacity, this is about leading the students, that we've got sufficient, or we've got the oversight and the capacity of the staff to lead students in intellectual inquiry, suited to the nature and level of the expected level, the learning outcomes. And then the equipped is divided then into three components. One is that the staff that are involved in the course and the teaching of the course have discipline or field knowledge. Second, that they have education skills. And third, that they're actually qualified within that discipline or field area. And I want to have a look at each of these three elements in a bit more detail. Again, after we've looked at each of these three elements in a bit more detail, I'll break you out into breakout rooms to have an exercise or an activity to look at these components. So first up, sufficiency. So sufficiency is, as I've noted before, is the staffing complement for each course study. And is it sufficient to meet the educational, academic support and administrative needs of the student cohorts undertaking the course? So as I've noted before, basically it's about staff numbers and what are the actual numbers of staff, but also the effective full-time load of staffing. And I know that this here can often be a challenging component across the institutions, both in universities and TAFEs and other higher education providers, is about this element of the effective full-time and the effective full-time and the load, but also the workload that the staff have got to undertake here. So we're looking at within sufficiency, is we're looking generally at the staff numbers, but also the workload that they have to deliver across this program. So this is about the number of units within the course, the student load, in other words, what the number of students are within the course, and also the unit offerings. So this is if we offer each unit just once a year, or we offer it every semester or every trimester within this, and also if we're teaching across multiple campuses. And we're thinking about making sure that we have sufficiency to cater for that workload. I will talk a bit more about workload and how there may be variations in workload across different types of institutions a bit later after we do the activity. But I do recognise that within some institutions like universities, that sometimes there's a greater workload emphasis on research for some universities. And for some more private providers, there's less of a workload for research, and hence a higher workload allocation to teaching and to those other duties. And so we can talk about that a bit more after we've undertaken the exercise. But first, for sufficiency, what we're looking at primarily is making sure we've got the staff numbers, and we're quite sensitive to the numbers of staff, but also the effective full-time loading of staff, and then also the workload that they as a collective have to deliver in regards to the number of units, the number of students, and the unit offerings. Is everybody okay with this part?
Yep, all good.
Yep. Glenn, can I just jump in, particularly with regards to the new provider categories and the standards for the provider categories? Universities will have a minimum research performance requirement that's sort of being introduced and will become a hard requirement. I think it's 2030, so there's a fair bit of time. but there will most certainly be, there's also pressure for the institutes of higher education, i.e. the non-university and non-university college institutions to nonetheless certainly undertake scholarship. So universities have got to do research and scholarship, and the non-universities, it's very heavily focused on scholarship. So there is some real pressure emerging from the regulator on that front. Over.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Paul. And please do add those insights as we go along. I'm also, as we go through different parts, I'm also going to bring up that term again of scholarship and what scholarly activity looks like for the standards and for AACSB, and then also what that future may look like as well, as Paul has indicated that there's going to be greater expectations of what scholarship looks like. So the second component is sufficiency. The second component that I want to talk about within sufficiency is about the distinction between permanent and casual staff, and then full-time and proportional staff. And this is quite a challenge sometimes that we have within the university sector, but within other elements as well. And this is particularly about the casualisation of the workforce. And we've seen this across many institutions, particularly over the last couple of years, when a number of universities have looked to reduce their staffing loads within these institutions, but have maintained or moved quite a bit of teaching, especially into the casual workforce. So particularly when we're thinking about sufficiency, when I was talking about the actual and the effective full-time, before within the actual staff, we also need to make you or be aware at least to the distinction between casual staff and permanent staff, and being especially sensitive that casual staff have limited capacity to meet the educational, academic support and administrative needs of student cohorts undertaking their course. It's not to say that they do not have capacity, but given the nature of their employment, the temporal nature, both in the allocation, but also a casual contract length, that they have limited capacity to achieve all these items. And so that's something that for the reviewers looking to accredit or to undertake the accreditation processes are quite sensitive to as well. For the second element is the regards to full-time and proportional staff. And again, just to re-emphasize here that proportional staff have proportional capacity to meet the educational, academic support and administrative needs of student cohorts undertaking the course. That is, if we have a full-time, like a 1.0 staff member, they've got one proportion to be able to provide that educational, academic support and administrative needs for the student cohorts, versus a 0.5 has half that capacity to do that. And so again, we just need to be sensitive to these elements of sufficiency when we're looking at the staff numbers, also their appointment within that space. So I'm going to now share a link within the chat space. And this is to a Google folder. And within the Google folder, there's different groups. Now, each of these groups are replications of the same case, but I'm going to divide us up into groups. And what I'm going to ask you to do is in case one, which is on the first tab, is I want you to have a look at this institution. And I want you to see if they've got sufficient academic staff to meet the educational, academic support and administrative needs for the student cohorts undertaking the Bachelor of Tourism. So again, as we've already highlighted, I want you to be paying attention to the permanent staff roles and responsibilities, the proportional staff capacity to complete the roles and responsibilities, the casual staff capacity to complete the roles and responsibilities, and the work achievable within the proportion. Right? So those different elements that we've just gone through, what I would like you guys to do is to review those within the case, within the case study. So I am now.
Glenn, just before we go into those rooms, I've had a look at the document. Can you explain what the chief examiner role is?
That is a great question. Thanks very much, Naomi, for that. So a chief examiner role within this institution is the person that has got official responsibility for designing, creating, developing, and facilitating or delivering the learning and assessment for that unit. So they may not actually be the primary deliverer, as in teacher of that unit, but they've got the responsibility for designing what is taught and what is assessed within that unit.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Penny, I'm just not sure if I've got ability to create breakout rooms. Oh, no.
Can you check now? You should have.
Yep, there it goes. Thank you. All right, so we've got breakout rooms are created. I want you to go into those case studies and I'll give you 10 minutes. Do you think 10 minutes is sufficient? All right, I'll give you 10 minutes and we'll rejoin after that. So Penny, during this 10 minutes, you can pause the recording, or if I've got the ability to do that. And the vision for the focus and the vision for the institution, in that they'll be looking for staff allocation and staff workload to be matched with that vision of the institution or for the allocation. So if it is going to be a relatively research intensive institution, they would see a workload with a greater recognition of research, versus if it's not, they would anticipate to see and allow for a greater allocation of workload into teaching and the like within that space. Does anyone else have any other questions for that exercise? All right. So overall, broadly, that profile that you've seen is one that would be probably deemed as sufficient within those allocations that I've noted before. So again, when we're thinking about, oh, sorry, I've gone back too far. The staff numbers, actual and effective full-time load, and also the workload for the number of units, the student loads, and the unit offerings, and the timing and the campuses, that broadly that workload would actually be, or the staffing would be seen as sufficient. And again, taking into account the balance between permanent and casual and full-time and proportional staff members within that load. So the other question that we have within this context, and this was one of the points that Paul noted within that group there, was really about that oversight. Within the oversight, what we saw here was that the profile for the course, did we have the staffing structure and people in response, or had roles of responsibility for academic oversight and the teaching capacity? So for the oversight, what we're looking for is the program leadership structure, the course structure, and the unit structure here. And so what you saw within that profile was that, yes, we have a dean, which was in charge of the whole school or the faculty program. We have a course director and course leader. We also had unit leadership structures, so those chief examiner roles. So that oversight component there is demonstrated within that profile that you've just been looking at within this context. So that's what, sorry, I've jumped ahead of myself, but what I want you to look at now then is the oversight. So given that I've just reviewed what the potential and likely response is going to be, this should not take you much time, but it really just reinforces what Paul highlighted. So I do want to give you a few minutes just to think about the profile demonstrated within this case study, within that case that you were just looking at now, to again see if these oversight roles exist and that the responsibilities for the roles exist. And again, you may want to have that discussion in comparison to your own institutions or other institutions that you've worked at. Does anyone have any questions before I send you out to breakout rooms again? Right. All right. So given actually, and this is my core management before, given that we have got some new people with us and they're distributed across the groups, I will allocate again 10 minutes for this so that you can spend a bit of time to have that discussion and introductions as well. All right. So I'm going to send you out now for 10 minutes and we're looking at academic oversight now. We've just got groups coming back. They'll be back in just over a minute.
I just realized that this was daylight saving time, so I'm an hour late.
We're fine.
Maybe what I'll do is that I'll just sit quiet here and I watch what's happening.
Yeah, I'm sure that when we go into breakout rooms, I'm sure they'll keep you updated as well.
Sure. Nice to see you, Glenn, and thanks for organizing that.
That's good. Penny's the key organizer and the key person leading all this process. So, but yeah, so we'll hopefully everybody will be back in about 30 seconds.
Very good. All right. Good to see you.
Hi, Guy.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Likewise, I'm sorry I'm late. I didn't realize it was daylight saving time.
I know. We've got meetings, but most of the conference meetings are scheduled for Queensland time, and yet all these other meetings are Melbourne time or Sydney time because that's where we are. But it's going to confuse people. I might have to reiterate in future emails.
That's okay. It's all good.
Cool. Thank you. All right, so welcome back, everybody. Obviously, I relatively well previewed what the likely responses are going to be within this one here, but it's still really important for me and everybody else, I think, just to go through a discussion of what the what you did come out with. So for group 2, Marcelo, can you give us an overview of what you guys discussed?
Yeah, so we did see some good structure there, which the foundation was laid out quite nicely, but we still felt quite stretched resource-wise, like not enough staff, perhaps having enough time to complete their task and roles properly. And there was a little bit heated discussion between some people around whether the course director should be actually involved in teaching. So we've looked at the consent, the disadvantages. So that's sort of where we left it. We didn't really consolidate what we think, but yeah, that's definitely a good point to consider at that situation of the scenario where you've got the director who's probably managing and also teaching, which is good from the student perspectives as you understand the students perhaps better at year 1, 2, and 3. But then what about the management side of things? So if there is anything else from the team that you would like to add, please do so.
That was great.
All right, thank you very much, Marcelo, and group 2. So group 3, Mirren?
Sorry, I can't. Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm going again. Yeah, I think we sort of discussed sort of similar things. I think that we sort of we had a bit of a discussion about the idea that the deans very often are not involved in teaching, but there are some schools that still have deans involved in teaching, and we thought that's probably something that's actually quite important. We think that, we're supposed to be about educating students, so having students in having people at the higher level involved in teaching, we thought was quite important. Is there anything else that we talked about?
No, that's it, Mary. Just that across our group, we had people from quite different institutions, and we did notice some differences in terms of the hierarchy. And some institutions, the hierarchy are at the coalface still teaching, and yet at others, they haven't touched a classroom for a long time. So I think we do have to be mindful of the differences across different institutions.
Yep, brilliant. All right, thank you very much, Miriam and Nikki from Group 3. Group 1, Andrew Lee.
Yeah, I think we come from the different institutions as well, public, private, and also we face some challenges. However, I think we have a quite good structure, except for I think the one she mentions, I don't remember the name, Sandra, no, not Sandra, it is another name, which was just mentioned about the worrying about the qualified staff run away because they noticed that the work schedule and not much opportunity for them due to the COVID. Otherwise, the structure seems to be okay. Speaking for ICMS, because I am the ICMS staff as well, so we have a quite good structure. We have a program manager also involved. Other institution might go as program director, so it's also involved in teaching as well. We have a Mirin here. We have a Glenn also involved in teaching, so it's quite good. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much, Andrew, in Group 1. Naomi for Group 4.
Thank you. We were sort of a little bit at odds around understanding the responsibilities for the roles and the position description. I guess didn't feel that we had enough information to determine what sort of moderation was happening, for example, in between who's designing the unit and then who's teaching it. If you're designing it yourself and then teaching it yourself, you know, how can we be sure that the right thing is happening by the students in that particular regard? So, for example, the course director is designing, or the chief examiner for 101, which is the intro to the unit, which is great. That means there's a senior person hopefully engaging with first years, but they're also teaching it. And so aside from the tutor at the bottom of the list there, we don't really know who else has got oversight into what's happening in that particular regard. Yeah, so the academic oversight's a little bit difficult to ascertain from that particular spreadsheet because as we mentioned previously, we sort of don't understand the moderation hours or what's included in their position with regards to that moderation, as well as you know, student feedback and so on.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you very much, Naomi and Group 4. So I think overall, sort of as a summary, what we've noted is that they appear to have the roles and the structure there for oversight, but we're unsure, and we've got less certainty as to the responsibilities for the roles within that structure. And so, as Naomi's very much emphasised there, it's going to be very important that those responsibilities are also very clear. What are the responsibilities for people within each of these positions? And generally these are presented within position descriptions. So it's always good, I think, that when you are asked to take on such a role, that you are have very clear guidelines as to what the responsibilities are, what the scope of that role is, and within that situation. And then for accreditation processes, generally these position descriptions are going to be submitted with the structure of the course leadership structure or course oversight structure. There'd also be those position descriptions for those roles of responsibility within that framework. Right. Were there any other points that anyone had in regards to academic oversight?
Can I just throw a couple of ideas? And Glenn, I've not looked forward to the front of the slide, so I could be throwing up something. But one of the sort of real essences of the university worldview is this idea of contested thinking, that courses bubble up from within, that individual academics will propose a unit or a course or a subject or whatever, and that its development is contested and debated and discussed. Whereas particularly in the vocational sector, the curriculum is received, there's the national training packages. And so you can have a sort of conflict between something that's received and processed as opposed to something that arises and is debated and discussed. And one of the things I certainly picked up in our conversation was that we have the titles that appear to offer issues of oversight and process and governance. But the question is there the sort of debate and contest of ideas in the development of curriculum, and sort of concomitant with that is the issue of comparison and reference points and checking benchmarking and all of that. Thank you.
Yeah. So as well as structure and the like and responsibility, also about that process and how that process is managed and run, and how inclusive, transparent, etc. it is as well. Yeah. And I'm also very aware that contest, or particularly when a vocational institution is starting to deliver a higher education program, and the staff interact within that context, that there can create some contest in and of itself within that. Any other points or any other questions or comments that people would like to make in regards to oversight?
Glenn, I think what we also discussed in the group, and maybe further to Paul's comment on leadership, is whether or not we are increasingly seeing more junior or staff taking on leadership positions in the absence of professoriates within these kinds of teaching spaces, and whether that is the trend, ideal, or whether or not in the future we have more of that kind of collaborative design spaces like a college of peers, where in the absence of these levels of formal leaderships within an institution, the material could be endorsed, validated by somebody within this college of peers as a way of professional development, because that's the next iteration of the AACSB quality assurance, that you need to have those quality circles as loops. So it's just something that many of us are experiencing as course coordinators, because I'm signing off on, we were just joking, workloads and stuff for people who are more senior than I am because of the nature of a very lean skeleton workforce, for example.
Yeah, and I think that there's similar to the context that Mika highlighted earlier, particularly over the last couple of years, that quite a bit of change has induced quite a bit of change within these contexts. For accreditation, what they're particularly interested in is having the structure and having people that are suitably capable to implement the responsibilities of that role. But very much so, Aaron, the process of the peer engagement, cross-institutional peer engagement within these different spaces is something that is both achievable and I think applicable within this context. But within the accreditation process, they'll still be looking for an internal structure and internal responsibilities. For that other element that you know, the first point, which is about who is capable, and if how long within a position or how long in an institution determines capability, that will be something up for the institution, and matching or making sure that the person that they're appointing to such roles has the capabilities as outlined within those position descriptions. And I think for accreditation, generally they're pretty okay to make sure, or that if the institution is determined that there is a process and there's a match between the person and the position, that for accreditation purposes, they'll accept that generally. Anyone else have any other insights into that part as to junior, or how junior and or senior staff would be in these roles, and what issues that is brought up in regards to accreditation?
Can I just jump in very quickly?
Yep.
Particularly as a sort of old grey shiny headed person, seniority is not about age. It is about a combination of knowledge and experience and the capacity to lead, and that is not just an academic issue, that's a personal development issue, and that, you know, it behoves our organisations to make that investment in our up and coming young people, God, I really do sound old. But you know, the institutions have to invest in the development of people, that they just can't throw somebody in at a senior position and expect them to make a go of it. That's just unfair and wrong. Thanks, Glenn.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So I'll move on now to our next part, which is our third part within this context. And this is about capacity. And so there's those three elements. Do we have sufficient staff? Do we have the oversight? And then do we have capacity? So academic staffing profile for each course of study provides the level and extent of academic oversight, as we said, and teaching capacity needed to lead students in intellectual inquiry suited to the nature and level of the expected learning outcomes. And that's directly from the standards. So what we're talking about here is the roles and responsibilities populated by appropriately capable staff. And these are within our program leadership roles, our course leadership roles, and our unit leadership roles. So do we have the capacity? And generally what this capacity then is dependent upon is what we call the equipped staff. So are the staff equipped for this? And this leads on directly from what Paul and Aaron were just highlighting as to seniority within an institution to take on responsibility. And again, what the standards and then accreditation would say is, do you have the capacity, or do the people within these roles and responsibilities have the capacity to undertake these roles? And this here should be demonstrated generally or within accreditation processes is demonstrated through the staff CV matched to the position descriptions for each of these roles. So what we're talking about in capability is the equipped staff members. And so I want to delve more into this equipped staff member within the standards. And so what does equipped mean? So in the teaching context or in the academic context, what we're saying here is that the staff with responsibilities for academic oversight and those that have with teaching or supervisory roles within courses or units of study are equipped for their roles, including having one, knowledge and discipline, knowledge of the discipline or field. Number two, skills in contemporary teaching, learning and assessment. And three, a qualification in a relevant discipline. What equip means is having all three of these. So it's not an either or, this is having all three of these elements within their profile. So a bit more detail as to what these are further elaborated to mean. So discipline or field knowledge is knowledge of contemporary developments in the discipline or field, which is informed by continuing scholarship or research or advances in practice. So this is actually quite inclusive, that the knowledge can come through research, scholarship, or advances in practice. And we'll delve a bit deeper into this, and particularly how AACSB also allows for this breadth of contemporary knowledge or keeping currency within the context. But there's some important words here, and again, we'll touch on these a bit later about contemporary and continuing as well. So the second element, which also needs to be demonstrated by all staff within these roles and having roles and responsibilities, is to have education skills. Now, these are skills in contemporary teaching, learning and assessment principles relevant to the discipline, role, modes of delivery and the needs of the student cohort. And again, we'll delve deeper into this a bit later. But again, I'll just draw attention to at this point, key word here being contemporary and also relevant to their roles within the discipline. And then the third element here is qualified. And so this is a qualification in a relevant discipline at least one level higher than is awarded for the course of study, or equivalent relevant academic or professional or practice-based experience and expertise. So this one here, and generally what we'll see here is the qualification would be an academic qualification, but it does also leave the room leave room open for professional or practice-based experience and expertise. But again, we'll delve into that a bit later as to how we can interpret professional and practice-based experience and expertise, and at what level it should be to be deemed as equivalent to those qualifications. So let's start off with our first case within this space. So we're going to be looking at case 2A, which is on the second tab when I should send you back out to the breakout rooms. And within these, what we're looking for here is, do the institution's staff have the knowledge of contemporary developments in the discipline or field, which is informed by continuing scholarship or research or advances in practice? Excuse me. So contemporary, generally we'll be seeing contemporary as being recent, and we generally quantify that within the last 3 to 5 years. Discipline or field would be in the discipline or field that they're teaching. So this here can be the broad degree area, but quite often is also actually targeted to the actual unit that they're teaching, or the subject that they're teaching. So quite often what we can do here is we can look to the unit that they're teaching to see if their discipline or field knowledge is related to the unit of teaching. Continuing means ongoing, and will come up later, but sustained and ongoing. So it means that it's not just a one-off thing that's happening, but there's evidence that this is an ongoing contemporary knowledge. Scholarship, and this here will touch on to what Paul was highlighting earlier, but in here, I just want to draw a distinction between scholarship as treated here as to what the future will be for scholarship. So scholarship here is generally being interpreted as being engaged with research versus research, which is the undertaking and publishing of research. All right, so engagement with research versus the actual or primary activity of doing research. So drawing that distinction between scholarship or research, and then for our practice, advances in practice is advances are generally at the front end. So we're talking about our innovations and advance, and at a high level. So just being able to practice that thing is generally not seen as suitable. We need to be demonstrating this at a high level. So what I want to do now is to send you out to the breakout rooms. But before I do that, I just want to ask if there's anybody has any questions at this point before I send you out to the breakout rooms.
Sorry, I didn't put my hand up, but Glenn, just with regards to the research undertaking and publishing, I'm assuming that's the traditional version of publishing as opposed to, let's say, working within industry or, you know, commissioned reports and things like that?
Yep, so yes, research is generally seen as the more traditional, and then potentially consulting and the like can be deemed as practice. There is a bit of area across there which can be argued, and generally what we see is that institutions can set their own criteria as long as it's broadly aligned within those. Does that answer your question, Naomi?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Mika and then Paul.
Just a quick question. Is there time for a nature break? We're going to break it. Yeah, I think we were going to build a short break in.
All right. Yep.
If that's okay. Yeah.
That is okay. We'll just go to Paul's question, then we'll have a break, then we'll come back to the breakout rooms.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. Look, just very quickly, the whole debate about research is a really interesting one. We've got Boyer's sort of conceptualization of scholarship, but where life gets really interesting is the recent announcement by the Commonwealth Government of the $1.8 billion research translation / commercialisation fund. Now, I appreciate that's not our patch, but the impact factors and you know, all of those sort of metrics are moving very much in the space of, well, what impact does your work have? And so engagement with industry, reports that are picked up by industry to shape industry policy or processes or even a business process will be deemed, you know, high impact research you know, into the future. And again, my earlier point about the provider category standards and research performance. So we're going to see a lot of debate over the next few years about what really is research and what does research impact look like. But I'm tempted to follow Nikki's suggestion and take a bio break for a few minutes.
Yep. So what we'll do is we'll take a 5-minute break now. We'll come back to this collective session, then I'll send you out to the breakout rooms. All right, so your 5 minutes has started now. Group 1. Anna.
Hi.
Yeah. Can you give us an overview, Anna?
Yes, well, we didn't get through all of them because we were looking in a lot of detail, but we looked at person X, the Dean of School, and based on the information presented here, we thought that it is a person that demonstrates that they're maintaining currency based on the published articles in 2022 or expected to be published, and based on their experience, based on their highest qualification. But may I just note that we actually started with the discussion on conference attendee not actually constituting scholarship. That was the first thing that we all picked up, because at least at the institution that I work at, if you're present at a conference or if you're involved in a conference in any way, like a keynote speaker, that would be considered scholarship. Attending a conference is considered professional development, not really scholarship. So that applies pretty much to person X, A, B, C, D, and everybody else who just attended. Yeah, you would agree. Thank you. Person number 2, that was the course director. The course director published an article recently-ish, and they also have a PhD, which is the highest qualification. We had quite a bit of a discussion around this person meeting the requirements that TEXA would have for an organization. We questioned whether that would be the best person to lead in this type of role, but in terms of fulfilling what is required, we agreed that they do that. Person B, that was the lecturer, published articles recently, so that's fine. And they're also a fellow, which also led us to believe that this person is potentially a really good educator or a really good teacher. Given that they have a master's but not a PhD, we don't really have any information if this person is doing a PhD, but I remember Paul mentioned that if this was a person working for them, they would be chasing them up the whole time. How are you going with your PhD plans? Or, yeah. The next person, and I think that's all that we had time to get through, their last published article was in, for the previous one. So person B, we determined that this person is a full-time lecturer and they're looking after 4 subjects and teaching 4 subjects. So this is potentially not a person who really wants to do research or do a PhD. And they probably want to have a bit more of a life. But yeah, Paul was very certain that he would be encouraging them to do a PhD. So next person was C, and that was also a lecturer. Last published article was quite a long time ago, so 2009. However, they are a senior fellow at the
Higher Education
Academy. So they also must be good. And again, Masters in Education. So and that also looks like a person who is focusing on teaching rather than research based on their workloads that we saw on the previous sheet. So yeah, that's really as far as we could go, because we did have quite a bit of a discussion about this.
Yep, that's great. Thank you, Anna. And group 1. Of note, what we're wanting to focus on at this one here is just the contemporary knowledge of discipline as demonstrated by scholarship, research, or practice. So those first 3 columns, and you've gone a bit more extensively, which is good, and it's going to prepare you for the future exercises, which is brilliant. So what we're looking at here, and this is definitely one of the key points, and it may come up again later, is what what can we use to determine or demonstrate scholarship as compared to research? Because within the standards, they make a distinction that it can be demonstrated by scholarship or research or practice. So the standards make a distinction. And then the next question then becomes is, and this is not a question that I'm posing, but a question to consider for later today, is thinking about what is that distinction and how can we articulate that distinction between scholarship and research. Room 2, Anita.
Hi, Glenn. We didn't go in details like group 1 did, but what we looked at, as you were saying, we looked at that at least each one of them would meet one of the other continuous scholarship research or advancing practice. Then we identified that F, which is, I believe, a casual lecturer and tutor, is possibly the one that is not meeting at this stage the requirements, being that they've published research more than 10 years ago. They have done a little bit of scholarship by attending a higher education workshop series, but they also have only a bachelor degree and no practice-based experience. So that would be considered, I guess, not meeting the standards. We also noticed that D was, while they've they've attended and created some scholarship, maybe that was sort of the higher up in the rank in terms of weakness, because it doesn't show as much, I guess, research, but it still does, or he or she still does have some practice and some scholarship. So definitely F will be the one that we've identified as being the weak link within the faculty. I think one thing that I think it was a good point of discussion as well was that while sometimes it's important to look at, the paper and what looks good on paper, it often happens that within the faculties you have people and colleagues that actually might not engage as much in those activities. However, they add a lot to the student experience regardless. We were giving the example of, for example, full-time industry manager of full-time industry people that don't necessarily engage with research, scholarship, and such activities. However, because they have a full-time job, but they still add to the experience anyway. So sometimes, even if it's not on paper, it's definitely something that adds to the overall experience. Mika, I think, was there anything else that I'm leaving out?
No, I think you've done us proud. You've done us proud. Yeah. The idea, well, we kind of shifted at the end towards a conversation on if we were the AACSB, we wouldn't take snapshots like this of the teaching people, but we'd also take into account who's the development team and talk about these, high level mixed development teams, which have people both from industry and academia, and that there's a good balance and that the whole unit development and setup leads towards successful teaching rather than just spot checking the teachers who are actually teaching what's going on. But that's left up to us to improve the world. So we thought we'd just fix it while we were there in the breakout room.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Anita and Mika. We will definitely come on to that fixing thing in our final stage. That's part 4. So moving on then to Sumi, group 3. Did you have anything new to add?
Yeah, so for what we found, I guess holistically, we thought that the staff did meet a lot of those requirements from a contemporary scholarship and discipline area. We did find staff member F kind of lacked within that discipline area, having not published since 2009 and had no practice detailed there as well. So that's probably one that really stood out. The other one was we picked up on, I think it was staff member D, has a bachelor qualification, but was at a senior lecture level. So we were just wondering and questioning what that was, whether that was built from industry experience in a leadership position or something like that.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Simi. Anything new to add from Group 4, Sandra?
Sorry, my mouse is slippery. Well, we were discussing what Sumi just mentioned, the person F, and that is in charge of teaching these capstone projects and does not have much publications or has been updated. And we were also wondering that everybody is noted as having attended higher education workshop series in regards to scholarship, but there is no specification about what they have learned there. What was it about? So we were unclear. I don't know if I missed anything. I think no.
I think that's covered everything. We did talk about person D, who is running both the capstone units, and just a query there around how contemporary their research practices are if they aren't publishing or don't seem to have, I mean, I know you said not to go past the first few columns, but they don't have any publications at all. And they don't have any higher degree by research sort of qualifications either. So I guess depending on what we're asking students to do in those two industry projects, the industry and research project, particularly 304, whether that's a concern.
Yep. All right. Thank you very much, Naomi and Sandra, for that in Group 4 and for all the groups for the responses there. What we're looking for within this exercise was to see if there was evidence that the staff of the institution had had knowledge of contemporary developments in the discipline of field. And this could be demonstrated through scholarship or research or practice. Broadly, what we can see through these is actually for this contemporary knowledge, and we'll address the other criteria shortly, is that if they've got basically a feature in one of those first three columns, then that's okay. However, this then raises questions, and as you guys have highlighted, as to what was the nature of their engagement within each of these. And then also, the other element really is about the continuing nature or the ongoing nature. So what each of these records are indicating is just the last episode of research, of scholarship, and or of practice. And so what we'd be looking for within an accreditation process is to see if this is ongoing. In other words, that there's multiple points of evidence that this has taken place. So for example, there's been a history of scholarship, or there's been a history of research, or there's been a history of practice that's been ongoing and represented within the contemporary context. So for the accreditation process for contemporary discipline and field knowledge, if they've got basically a tick in any of those first three columns, then that would be okay, because again, the standard highlights that it's either, so scholarship or research or advances in practice. Is everybody okay with that one? With how that there would be treated, and that's okay? Yeah. Sure. But I want to just touch on, just before we do move on to Anna's point about scholarship and how different institutions deal with scholarship or how they articulate scholarship. And this is one of the points we noted before. Within the standards, there is a distinction between scholarship and research. And what research would generally imply is the participation in the primary practice of research, which then makes a distinction, which scholarship is not the primary participation within research. Instead, it's some engagement within research more broadly. And so an institution may be able to make an argument that scholarship is demonstrated by attending a conference rather than necessarily presenting at a conference. So a presentation at a conference is generally implying that they've actually been a primary participant within the undertaking of the research, which would be a demonstration of research rather than scholarship within that context. But again, as we've already highlighted through a number of our other talks or points today, is that this needs to be consistent with the type of institution, the goals of institution, and consistently aligned within that context as well as what they've articulated as scholarship for their context. Did anyone have any other questions or points? And now we want to move on to the other elements which get a bit more complex, and you've already previewed some of those points before.
Glenn, I think in this space of recognizing scholarship, research, or practice, there is also a growing body of institutions and disciplines engaging in what we call NTROs, non-traditional research outputs. And those could be in an event space where you're curating a art gallery exhibition, for example, and there's certain guidelines out of the ARC of what constitutes NTROs, which might offer a bit more clarity and support what you just mentioned earlier.
Yep, thanks, Aaron. But that is still captured within the research. So even though it's non-traditional, that would still be captured under what the accreditation body would say is research. Yep.
Glenn, can I just also make a comment about the Higher Education Academy, the HEA, is something that is really picking up a lot of momentum. I'm sure quite a few people here today have already have achieved that, but it's something that I know at UQ they are looking at as a way for us teaching-focused academics to be able to demonstrate our scholarship of teaching. And if you've gone through the process of applying for that, yay, Naomi, good luck. It's really a very complicated and lengthy process to go through. You have to basically put your whole portfolio together to evidence your scholarship of teaching and other bits and pieces. So we had a chat about that in our group, and I thought it might be interesting just to throw that in here as well. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much, Nikki. Sorry, somebody else.
Could I just add something?
Yep.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, David here. Could I just add something, and that is that I think for everybody teaching in tourism and hospitality, they need to show evidence that they've incorporated some of the lessons learned from COVID-19 in their teaching, in their research, and I guess in their approach to how they actually teach subjects. We've all been affected by it in a way. Every sector of tourism and hospitality has been affected. Also, too, our teaching's been affected by it. I mean, each one of us all had to, within a week at the end of March, become experts on Zoom. It's a really, that's actually quite an important thing. And that, when we talk about being current with developments in the industry, that's really an integral part of it over the last 2 years.
Yeah, and that is a really good point there, David. And that there is captured in other parts of the standard. But I think that what you've highlighted there, particularly for this standard, is that the importance that the TEXA places on contemporary to make sure that the staff and your awareness of development within the discipline of knowledge is contemporary. So it does include making sure we've got systems and or approaches where our staff are up to date with this, which includes obviously a very ready example of COVID within the recent context. Yeah. So then I'll then transition on to our next one, which is teaching. So we've already started on this, and Nikki made a great segue there about talking about the fellowships, and Anna also highlighted that a number of the staff within the institution, or a small number of staff within the institution, do have fellowships within the HEA. Aaron's recently got a senior fellowship. I've recently got a senior fellowship within that process, and I think there's some others that are going through that process now. And we'll talk about this again at the end as to what it takes to do that, but also how potentially we can support each other in going through that process. But within this context, what we want to do is focus on that second element here of capability. Is does the institution staff have the skills in contemporary teaching, learning and assessment principles relevant to their discipline, their role, the modes of delivery, and the needs of particular student cohorts? Again, within this context, there's an emphasis on contemporary, and generally that's treated as within the last 3 to 5 years. Generally, there is a high emphasis on external or external or a more objective clarification as to education skills, and this is through qualifications and or external recognitions. And so fellowships are an external recognition. A qualification would be a higher education qualification. It can also be demonstrated through higher education research and also higher education scholarship. And I just want to highlight here that generally higher education practice or experience is not treated as a demonstration of this criterion. So just by saying that I've been teaching for the last 10 years is generally not treated as a demonstration of this criterion within the standard. Instead, it's one of those three other points above it: a qualification, external recognition, engagement within higher education research or higher education scholarship within that space. So what I want to do now is looking at the next three columns, and I recognize that many of you have already looked at those next three columns under the education header, to look at those, to identify in the profile of those staff, the institution staff, if they meet those criteria for having contemporary teaching, learning and assessment principles relevant to the discipline, role, modes of delivery for the student cohorts. Does anyone have any questions before I send you out? All right, I'm only going to give you 10 minutes for this one. All right, I'll open up the rooms now.
Hello again. So we looked at just those three columns that you mentioned. And based on that, we weren't sure whether we, I guess to demonstrate these, all these three conditions had to be met, or if only one had to be met like the last time.
Yep.
So again, Ken?
One, either or.
Okay, so I guess the only problematic person in that whole group is definitely the dean, who has, which you know, it seems to be, you know, very, you know, it had a qualification in 2007, and that was about it. Quite a few of them only have that scholarship aspect, but as you were saying before, someone was saying before, we also have to look into, I guess, the development, or you know, how this is, if it is continuous development or continuous development scholarship or engagement, or if it is only a one-off that has happened in 2021. We also mentioned about, I believe Marcella was mentioning a point regarding the fact that when they're doing reaccreditations of courses in her institution, often what happens is that you collect all these together, but you don't necessarily associate that to the individual, I guess, lecturers or, you know, people that are working. So this wouldn't appear necessarily as problematic. I think, have I missed anything else? And we were talking about also the importance of industry as well again here.
Yeah,
but
well, we talked about industry and networking as well too, because one of the advantages, I guess, for a lot of places, a lot of universities who are and colleges who are doing tourism, is if they have an extensive network which cuts across most or all of the sectors of tourism and hospitality, that's a huge advantage. Not only in terms of access to talent, but also to in bringing that access to students, which is really what we're all about.
Yeah, and that there is a good point, and we generally see that within either the first element there about contemporary knowledge of the field and how that's demonstrated there, or in the next criterion that we'll look at, which is an equivalence to qualification through high levels professional practice. Within this one here, what the accreditors are really looking at is, do those that are teaching have teaching expertise, and can they demonstrate it? Which may be the get out of jail free card for the dean, as you've noted there, Anita. If the dean doesn't have that profile.
Actually, we had raised this point. I forgot to tell you this. We weren't sure if you know, these requirements were specific to roles or, you know, responsibilities that they had.
Yeah. And so it might be able for the dean and for the institution to say, well, actually the dean isn't involved in teaching, and hence that's not part of his responsibilities and role, and so therefore he doesn't have to demonstrate this capability within that space. Yeah. Did any other group identifying any thing new to what Anita and David highlighted for room 2? Yeah. All right, that's great. Oh, thanks very much, Anita, for the summary. So what we identify here is that what we're looking at and what's going to be important for institutions to be able to demonstrate is that their educators can educate and have expertise within that space. Again, just having evidence that there is education practice within it is generally not seen as being able to demonstrate this criterion. So just saying that I've got 10 years of experience is generally not demonstrating that we've got the contemporary teaching, learning and assessment principles relevant for the discipline and the role. Generally, there's some expectation to have a higher evidence profile within that space. So then on to the last part here, which is the qualification in a relevant discipline, at least one level higher, awarded to the case of study or equivalent. And we've already highlighted, I think Anna, 2 workshops ago, or 2 activities ago, noted that this here was going to be an issue. So does the institution staff have a qualification in a relevant discipline at least one level higher than is awarded for the course of study, or equivalent, relevant, academic, or professional, or practice-based experience? So key elements here is relevant qualification. So this is relevant as in the discipline or field. All right, so it has to be in the discipline or field to the area that they're teaching. And this can again be at the unit level demonstrated here. And then the level of qualification. So is the level of qualification higher than the level that they're teaching at? And then for this other elements, academic experience and expertise, professional experience and expertise, or practice-based experience and expertise. And again, what the key emphasis here is going to be, is it equivalent to the level of qualification that would be expected? And is it that experience and expertise, is it relevant to this area? And so that relevance again is about matching with the area that they're teaching. All right. So this one again, I'll send you out for a brief period of 10 minutes, maybe a little bit less, but we'll say 10 minutes to get the work done in the first 8. But does anyone have any questions before I send you out?
Sorry, I do have a question. Is this also, as we've done in the past, to they have to obtain one of these, or they have to show competencies across all of them?
One or the other.
Okay.
Yep. All right. All right, so I'll send you out to the breakout rooms again, and I'll see you back in 10 minutes.
Other expertise. And we realized that there are a number of them that may be a bit problematic. The first one is a person F. The person F has become in tourism, and this person is teaching tourism futures and introduction to tourism. But if we're thinking that you should have at least 1 degree higher to qualify to teach such of these things. And also when you look at the person's other qualifications, we just run through to see. The last publication was in 2009, and nothing else has been done except going for skill training or higher education workshop into 2021, which everybody attended. So we think that that particular person, there's a little bit of mismatch when you look at that. Another interesting one we came up with is person B. The person B has master's in communication, yes. The person has a fellowship. And when you look at what the person teaches, the person is a permanent staff. And this person has a lot of courses or a lot of subjects at hand. And such a person teaches tourism impacts, the person teaches tourism planning, the person teaches tourism geographies, and also sustainable destinations. And we're thinking that there could be a little mismatch when it comes to the person's qualification and what he or she is teaching. For instance, the communication and the sustainability could be a bit of mismatch because sustainability has a lot of nuances. And also when you look at tourism geographies, someone with communications might not be a perfect fit for communications. We also looked at person H, and it looks like person H is a good fit for what he or she is teaching, because person H is teaching tourist behavior, and the same person is teaching tourism impact. No. The person is teaching sustainable tourism. And this person has a qualification, a PhD in business sustainability, which has some kind of a good level or match when it comes to that one. Then we took a look at another one, that's person D. And this person D also has become strategy. And the same issue as the person F. So this person should have at least a degree higher to be teaching this particular program. But he or she is also trying to improve him or herself. But we still think there should be a bit of a higher degree than what the person is teaching. But when you look at it closely, this person is a permanent staff and the person is a senior lecturer. And taking a look at it again, you realize that this particular person has a rich business or practice-based background, and the person is a tourism business manager. So looking at what he or she is teaching, looking at what person D is teaching and the qualification, we think it might not be a big problem because this person is teaching industry projects, which is in line with the rich practical experience. And also the person is teaching research project where we raised a concern, whether the research project is industry-based where you may have to develop strategies for businesses, or you have to develop communication or marketing strategies and other things for businesses, or is academic research project. If it's academic research project, then you need someone with rich experience in research, methodology, communications of analysis and findings and all those things. So these are some of the things we discussed. If I missed out any of them, I think my group members can help me with it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Was there any other points from other groups that were different to what Emmanuel's noted?
Hi, I think that our group 2, we had more of questions, especially to do with person F, because one question that was raised was that is person F in a process of maybe doing the master's, or the person is just stagnant at just the BCom qualification. And we also had other questions because when you look at person F, the person F is tagged as a lecturer or tutor. So the question is the person complementing a main professor, or is just the person taking maybe a major course? So that can also determine, because if the person is just complementing maybe a main professor, that can be maybe the reason why the person F is maybe feeling reluctant in maybe progressing or trying to maybe up their degree to a master's level. So, and maybe, and when you look at his or her status at maybe as a casual staff, that can also maybe be a reason why the person is not progressing. So these were actually some of the concerns or some of the questions that we were asking, because maybe there might be there might be an inadequate information about person F. So it looks like that person is feeling reluctant because maybe might have a different work somewhere else and using the teaching or lecturing or tutor, being a tutor as just a supplement. That is why.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Alice, for that. Before I do come into a summary of this, were there any other points or questions that others raised in their groups? All right. So person F is a person of concern. They don't have evidence of contemporary discipline knowledge or knowledge of the field from the beginning. Also, their qualification isn't higher than that of teaching, and they don't have an alternate demonstration through academic experience and expertise, professional experience and expertise, or practice-based experience and expertise. So, so that is a person that we would have of concern, or it would be a red flag within that context. However, as Emmanuel noted, is that there actually have some others which do have qualifications that are higher, but we would raise those questions. Are those relevant qualifications? Are they within the discipline within which they're teaching? So we have some, as Emmanuel highlighted, a person with a Master's in Communication. There's another person there with a Master's of Education within it. And are they relevant to the field that they're actually teaching in? And that there would be a question that would be asked. The other one was, and Emmanuel very well highlighted, that we had another colleague or another staff member within the institution which only had a Bachelor of Commerce but did have tourism management experience. So that's when we'd see actually the equivalence and relevance of the professional or the practice-based experience. And what we'd be looking at here is that level of practice-based experience demonstrated at a high enough level to be sufficient for teaching within this program. So would a manager of a tourism business be sufficient to be deemed as equivalent? So it's relevant within that space, but is that level, is it going to be equivalent? And generally would say a managerial role, if the business was of sufficient size, would be seen as equivalent. So we'd take their professional experience over and above their qualification within that space. But through this process, what we'd highlight here is that we've potentially got a number of red flags within this space, particularly person F, but not just person F. Again, those that are relying on qualifications, which may not be within that relevant area of teaching. For those red flags, what we generally look to do is go back to the earlier aspects of their profile to see, for example, if they got relevant academic experience. And generally that is going to be a demonstration through their research. So academic experience, or equivalent relevant academic experience would be, for example, publications within that discipline area, which would then be seen as equivalent of having that qualification within that space. So again, we have some potential elements of concern within that space. Alice, as you rightly highlighted, I haven't given you much information, which raises a lot of questions. And so generally what we'd be expecting is that we'd see a full profile of each of these staff members, which would be demonstrated within a CV, so that we could get that better insight as to these and across each of these criteria. The other element, which I want to go on to now, is, I suppose, an opportunity for institutions. Oh, sorry, I'll come to that soon. First want to just touch on a summary of the AACSB and how this links into what we've just been talking about, and then talk about how the standards actually have an opportunity for institutions to bridge or develop staff within this profile. So I want to go through this relatively quickly, but just to demonstrate that the standards that we have from TEXA and the like are being increasingly internationalized through these other accreditation bodies. So AACSB highlight that a participating faculty member being academic staff, actively and deeply engages in the activities of the schools and matters beyond the direct teaching responsibilities. Normally, and normally is a inclusive word, so normally the school considers participating faculty members to be ongoing members of staff, in other words, those on tenure or full-time continuing roles, regardless of whether, ongoing tenure roles, regardless of whether their appointments are full-time or part-time, and also if the position in the school is considered their principal employment. So if they're a proportional member of staff, they can still be seen as participating members of staff. But generally, we're talking about those, normally, we're talking about those that are full-time or part-time in an ongoing role. A supporting faculty member, however, does not normally participate in the intellectual or operational life of the school beyond the direct performance of teaching responsibilities. So generally within the supporting faculty, we see what we call potentially teaching associates, sessional staff or casual staff within that space. So participating staff are generally those that are ongoing employment roles. And within AACSB, this is important because they then have ratios as compared to participating versus supporting roles and what the limits or minimum limits of those ratios are. Oh, I've just gone. So what faculty are? So the faculty within the AACSB are divided into 4 categories. And these are normally those determined by a terminal qualification. Again, they've got normally, but i.e. a PhD or equivalent. And these would be termed scholarly academics or practice academics. And again, I want to touch on scholarly a bit later, and that distinction to what AACSB means by scholarly versus what the TEXA standards talk about in regards to scholarship versus research. And then the second 2 categories are normally have a master's qualification plus, in other words, and substantial professional experience and responsibility. And these would be termed scholarly practitioner or an instructional practitioner. This also links into what David was highlighting of the importance and the increased importance that we're seeing on industry connections, networking and capabilities to engage that network as well. Now, in all 4 of these roles, they need to demonstrate sustained currency, which is the equivalence of contemporary that we saw within TEXA, and relevant, appropriate to their classification. And then they have, in addition to these 4 categories, there are others, additional faculty. And again, there's specific proportions or percentages which can be allocated to the others compared to everybody else within AACSB. So just to provide a bit of highlight as to this classification, scholarly academics, again, these are ones with terminal degrees, so PhD, generally what we'd say within our discipline or field. And they would maintain their currency and relevance through scholarship. And within scholarship and AACSB, it means research. Research and activities related to the field of their teaching. So this is research that they're undertaking relevant to what they're teaching. Practice academics, however, again, would have a PhD within our discipline normally, and their currency and relevance, however, would be maintained through their professional engagement and interaction related to their fields of teaching. So more that these ones have got a terminal degree, but that they're maintaining currency through engagement with professional practice. As second to those with at least a master's and substantial professional practice, and they're maintaining their currency and relevance through scholarship, in other words, through research related to the professional background and experience and in their field of teaching, versus instructional practitioners are those maintaining currency through continued professional experience. Quite often we'd classify most people within a university setting would be scholarly academics, with a smaller number of practice academics and even less within the scholarly practitioners and instructional practitioners, However, as David highlighted before, we're seeing an increasing number of our practitioners, our scholarly practitioners, and especially instructional practitioners. Generally, these here might be very senior people within the business context who come in and do teaching within that space whilst maintaining either directorial roles or consultancy roles and the like within the business or professional world within that space. So what I wanted to highlight through here is that what we've been talking about in regards to having our discipline knowledge, contemporary discipline or field knowledge, to having our maintaining currency and contemporary nature, and the relevancy is being demonstrated not only within our TH&E accreditation standards, but also within these other standards as well. And we're seeing quite a high degree of nesting, or in other words, similarity between these as well within that space. So really, I just wanted to highlight that as that this isn't limited to our Australian and New Zealand context. Did anyone have any questions in regards to what I've just noted there before I move on to our final part? All right. So I'll just touch on very briefly student accessibility, another key component of the standards. What they highlight in student accessibility is that staff must be accessible to students seeking individual assistance. And generally, this is going to be a challenge with an accreditation if there's a very, very high reliance on casual staff. Generally, we see that casual staff within their workload models do not have a high proportion of time available for consultation and accessibility, and particularly for the larger issues beyond the unit in regards to the learning needs of the student cohort. So it's just a point to note rather than anything else. And then, as I noted before, casual staff, limited accessibility, proportional staff obviously have proportional access to students. So gaps in the staffing profile. This is the last part. So there is an opportunity within the standards that teachers who do not demonstrate those, the standards, I don't have the discipline, field knowledge, education skills and qualified, either or of those, for example, person F, they can be supervised by those that do have that profile. So within this institution, we can see that person F, for example, is under the guidance of their chief examiner within those units, and that there may be substantial, or that there would be generally seen as substantial enough guidance to cater for this person F, our red flag there, and their gaps in their profile. However, person F may be a continuing red flag, and it might be best to develop that staff member rather than just rely on the supervision opportunity that the standards provide. Which then leads us on to our next question, is how can we, which is how can we develop this? So part of this is through a formal guiding overseeing. So as I noted there for person F, they've got a chief examiner, but very importantly, that chief examiner, and this needs to be embedded within their position description, must meet the standard. If they're in the position where they're supervising other staff, they must be able to meet that standard, which is their contemporary discipline knowledge, have the education qualifications and skills, and to have the discipline qualification and or equivalent within that space for them to then take on that supervisory role. Which then leads us on to, hopefully, eliminating these future gaps. And so if the staff must clearly be engaged in ongoing, which is sustained, substantive academic or professional engagement activities to support their currency and relevancy within their fields, or what the texter would say is contemporary and relevant within their fields, how can we do that? So our last activity for the day is I'm going to send you out into the breakout rooms again, and I'll just send you out for a brief period of time. But what I want you to be thinking about is what can be some formal approaches to maintain contemporary discipline knowledge, or discipline or field knowledge, again, as demonstrated in either scholarship or research or practice, and to maintain contemporary education skills, which can be demonstrated through qualification or external recognition, scholarship, or research. So I send you out to the breakout rooms for 10 minutes to do this. Does anyone have any questions before I do send you out? So again, what we're thinking about within here is just what approaches, systems, or processes could an institution adopt to make sure that we have staff that are developed and able to evidence contemporary discipline and field knowledge and contemporary education skills. We're all good? All right. So again, open up the breakout rooms. I'll see you back in 10 minutes. What those responses are. And so that we can then use that as the basis for our mid-year meeting of the College of Peers. That was my almost final point. My other final point in the College of Peers was just to recognise David Berryman, who has been a participant within these sessions for a long time. I think 2013, sorry, that's correct.
It started at, yep, 2013, 2014. I don't think he's here.
Is he gone?
He was struggling with internet connection.
All right.
He has problem with the connection.
All right. When we see him, please recognise him. He's no longer going to be attending these sessions as a member of UTS. So next time you do see him, he'll be at Calthy. Thank him for his engagement and his contributions over those many years as well. Yeah. All right, on to you, Mika.
Okay, thank you. I'm not going to share any slides or anything like that, but I'll just acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from my current role for now as co-chair of the Teaching and Learning Special Interest Group, and the wonderful Nikki is another co-chair of the Teaching and Learning Special Interest Group. Now, when it comes to ongoing professional development and enhancing academic capacity, that's kind of, you know, where our remit, where we've chosen our remit to be in the Teaching and Learning Special Interest Group. Now, we've got a meeting next Friday week, and where we were at with the Special Interest Group were that we really had three areas that we were focusing on. One was a shared talking about teaching, which serves to motivate and create community and create a community of practice, community of inquiry. Sharing cross-institutional practical pointers and solving people's problems with any particular, you know, areas and contextualized, supportive practical pointers. But one of the big issues that we have focused on and do focus on is the scholarship of teaching and learning support and collaborative mentoring. So merging efforts amongst ourselves for future joint projects and research. So, for example, I've merged what I've done on active learning with Semra Gunre from Turkey, her work on experiential learning with her colleagues as well, merged it together and got a paper out of it. You know, and enhancing and creating a network of cross-institutional experts, developing paths of collaborative mentoring, and that will help serve to fill in, you know, with the ASSB and accreditation, helping bring academics forward. Because even by being a member of the scholarship of the Teaching and Learning Special Interest Group, you've already shifted yourself to a practice academic. And then if we get publications out of it, we become scholarly academics as well, which is helpful in the long run for everybody. So that's what we'll discuss at the next Teaching and Learning Special Interest Group and ways forward of achieving that. And also, while we're here, I'd like to highlight that we'll be putting out a call for co-chairs. Nikki's been fantastic and keeping us afloat. I've reached the stage where, for various reasons, I feel it would be better if I stepped away. I've been chair for quite a few years. So we're looking for 2 more co-chairs and hopefully also getting a co-chair, not from the government funded, but from a private institution or TAFE, because we really would like to see the voice of TAFEs and voice of private education providers highlighted in the teaching and learning special interest group. So yes, call for co-chairs and a call for attending the teaching and learning special interest group, which continues the work of the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. So that's it from me. Would you like to add anything to that, Nikki?
Yeah, probably just to remind people, I think most of you guys are registered. We've got a lot of registrations for our meeting next Friday for the SIG, which is at 3 p.m. Sydney time and 2 p.m. Queensland time. There's a lot of registrations already. If you haven't registered, it's a great thing to do today. We'll send that email and the Zoom links out in due course. But I guess I just want to follow up and say, firstly, thank you to Mika. She's done an amazing job as the chair of this particular SIG group for the last God knows how many years. And I came under her wing 2 years ago when we were in Auckland, and I've really learned a lot. She was talking about mentoring. I've learned a lot from her as, following her lead and learning from her in this space, which is an amazing space. And she's gone on now to her teaching and learning role at Southern Cross, which is great, perfect fit. So I thank her on behalf of everyone, and we'll do that officially at a later time. But just to re-emphasise, we will be looking for a couple of new, fresh chairs. I'll stay on as a continuity in the short term, so that whoever does join the team, we have a bit of continuity going forward. But it would be great to get some fresh people, and also, as Mika said, people from different institutions, so that we are very representative of all the great people and all the great work that we do. So thanks for that. That's all I wanted to add. Mika, back to you.
Thank you. And yeah, and I will mentor and support in the background on an as needs basis. So I'm not disappearing. I'm definitely not disappearing from Corthy or from the College of Peers, but yeah, yes. And thanks, Aaron. Yes. Aaron sent us a message, which is terrific. Yeah. But I'll pass the baton back to the I've lost my back to Glenn, because otherwise we're going to run over time.
Right. Thank you very much, Mika and Nikki. And I fully encourage everyone here to express interest in those roles. It's a great opportunity not only to further establish yourself and your profile, but also to make that contribution back to Southie. And it's a great opportunity, and it is a great group of people within the special interest group. I'm going to close very quickly here. Thank you very much for your time and your contributions through today. Again, Penny will send out the survey after Southie, after she's had a bit of time to recover after a very busy couple of months. And we will reconvene with a brief meeting sometime early April, I think. But again, we'll confirm that later. And we'll move on to our usual mid-year workshop session after what is being discussed at the April session. Right. Again, thank you very much for your participation. Penny will distribute the recording to all those that are registered. In the folder, you've got the presentation slides, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have. If you just send through an email, can set up a Zoom session or a phone call or whatever else if you wish. All right, so thank you very much, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks,
See ya.
Glenn.
Thanks,
Great.
Glenn. Thanks all.
Thanks, Penny. Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.